Hey Twinkle Toes, we're going to make another pair of earrings today. Today we're going to make bugle bead, seed bead hybrid type of earrings. The seed beads are obviously in the fringe and the bugles are in the woven portion. And because of this, I use a 4-pound instead of my go-to, which is a 6-pound fireline. I do this because a lighter gauge, or weight rather, is more friendly to the bugles. Bugles don't seem to tolerate multiple passes the way the regular seed beads do. And when we're weaving in ends from the fringe, space can get really tight really quickly. And so be sure to use a beading needle. Size 10 is preferred because you can get the thread into the eye pretty easily, and regular sewing needles can have a tendency to bust or break your beads, or they just do not fit inside of the beads. Beading needles are really consistent and just not so thick. So here we are. If you've seen the diamond bugle tutorial, you will be starting this foundation row just the same. I've created this tutorial under the assumption that most of you have seen my other tutorials, but I'm keeping the visual aspect of them for things that I typically will say to myself when I'm making something I haven't made in a long time. How did I loop that again? Or what was I supposed to do here? That's why I like to keep the visual. So for this earring, the foundation row will be 7 bugle beads across, like that. And so when you start the new row, you will grab 2 bugle beads and you'll work under that second loop. And as I've shown in previous videos, you just work back up through that second bugle and down through the first bugle, and then back up through the second bugle, and then you can start your next bugle. And this just pulls the bugles next to each other tightly so you don't have a little gap at the bottom or at the top, but mostly at the bottom. And it solidifies and fortifies each edge at the beginning of each row. And it's sort of like an insurance so that you don't have gaps and everything fits snugly next to each other. Assuming you already have a grip on how this whole process works, I'm gonna speed through the rest of it to the end. You'll work your way, working the brick stitch, the single brick stitch with the bugle beads, all the way till you have only 2 more beads at the very end of the piece, and then we will start weaving our way back up. And so here we are at the final little stretch of the woven portion. And it looks like I've run out of thread. I made the other guy and I thought I had enough to work my way back up to include the little loop at the top where we're going to hang the ear wire, but sometimes you run into this issue, which is why I decided to keep it in, because this is how I'm going to work this end. We're going to be working the fringe along the bias edge of either side of this woven piece, so I want to be mindful to work this to work this end that I'm going to weave in up the middle of the earring as best as I can, because I want to leave as much real estate open along the bias for the fringe, and I don't want those thread and needle passes to be too crowded when I'm trying to weave in the ends for my fringe. So if you run into this issue, don't panic. Just do your best to weave in your end up through the middle where you won't be working those fringe ends. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so now we need to create a loop for the ear wire. So I started a very small or a very short piece of fireline because I'm not going to be weaving an entire earring. I just want to create the loop. So to do that, I'm going to work up into the third bead from one side. Here I worked into the third bugle bead from the left. And then I add 6 seed beads on, and that's going to be my loop. And there's 6 seed beads from the pile of beads that I'm going to use in the fringe, so it's all cohesive and it matches. Then you skip a bugle bead, and that's going to be in the middle, so we're working out of that one, and then we're going to skip one, and then we're going to go down the next one. So we're coming out of and going into the third bead from either side on that foundation row. And so to create some sturdiness, I'm going to work down a row, and then I'm going to come back up, and then I'm going to work through into the foundation row again, back up through that third one, and then I'm going to loop back through. Whoop, let me get that out of the way. There we go. So I'm going to work back through the seed beads to sort of fortify that, because I don't want just one thread. It can handle just one thread, but I want these to withstand the test of time. So I'm going to weave as such. And then when you feel pretty confident about that, then you can just weave in the rest. So I come up through that second one, go down the third, and then weave down the middle. Weave in that end down the middle to keep your edges as free as possible. Then I'm just going to cut these guys, and if I need to put a flame to it, yeah, it looks like it. So I'll just grab a little lighter and burn that little part off, and then we're good to go. So I use the big eye needle here to weave in that last little piece because it's so short. It makes it a lot easier to weave that little piece in. Big eye needles are going to be your best friend. So here we have it, the 2 woven pieces. We won't be stringing any more bugles. We're going to be working with the seed beads from here on out for the fringe. So I like to use all-purpose sewing thread. A lot of people like 1G or other types of beading thread. They like thread conditioners, all this, that, and the other. I like to treat it like I'm sewing, and this is how I learned how to sew. You thread the needle and you double it, and that's worked for me. And I like it because it also fits into the beading needle, so I feel like it's a win-win here. So what I do is I work up the second bugle from the edge. So I work into the bottom, up, out the top, like that. and then we're going to work down into the top of the first bugle on that row. So here we have it. This is where we're going to start our first strand of thread, or first strand of seed beads. And you can work the color chart, or you can do whatever you want. You can make it all one solid color. It's up to you. But here I'm going to work the second half because I'm mirroring it. And then you're going to want to work past that first bead. It seems like common sense because if you work through it, you're going to lose all your beads. But guess what? If you're watching something on TV or listening to a podcast that's really captivating, you may not even be thinking about it, and you'll work through that bottom bead and lose all the beads off of your thread. I've done it. It's really obnoxious when you drop all your beads, especially if they're some sort of intricate color pattern that you're working in the fringe. It can be very disheartening. So here is where I change things up a bit. The bugle beads are so long, so if I work this normally along the bias and I have my one strand of seed beads per bugle, it's going to be too sparse. Those bugle beads are so long and they create a gap. So to remedy this, I work 2 strands of fringe as I work down the bias. And please be careful to work past that first bead at the bottom, as I mentioned before. Listen, I get it. You're up late at night, you're watching Mr. Ballin on YouTube, you're like 20 videos deep, and you're tired, but you can't get enough of him, and you can't get enough of your seed bead projects. I get it. And you miss that important step. And at 3 a.m, one little mistake can send you over the edge. So I just strongly advise that take your time. That's all I say. Just take your time. Double check. Okay, so now we're going to work down through that next bugle, and we're going to come out the bottom. I really, really hope that you did the other tutorial where we worked the fringe along the bias, because it's very thorough, and this is meant to build on top of that. So even if you don't make it, just kind of skim through it and get a feel for what we did in that one, and then you'll feel much more confident working through these. And these go a lot faster. And now you can see the pattern in which we're working down each step to the bottom. So we got our first strand in that second portion, and now we're going to work the second strand. And while I do encourage you to take your time with this step of skipping that bottom bead and working into the next bead and up the strand so that you don't lose your seed beads, I do not recommend bypassing Mr. Vollin's YouTube videos. Just saying. This next bugle that we're going to go down, and I'm just showing you up close right here because I want you to see how misleading it is when you look at those 2 strands and you think, oh, that's going to have a significant gap. It doesn't. Once you pull it through and it's nice and snug, it just cinches just like that. And the way they lay down is very nice. So here I would normally want to work down into that next bugle out the bottom, but I ran out of thread. And that was a sad moment during this tutorial, but I figure this is an opportunity to show you how I remedy these types of situations when you think you've planned ahead properly and you haven't. So I worked up the bias edge as if I would normally, and I have all the space in the world to weave this in back and forth. So I worked all the way up to that second row. You can see how it's falling, which is really nice. So I'm going to work back down. So I zigzag once and twice, and then once I'm back down here, I can cut off that woven end. So there you have it. So now with the new thread, we're going to come down from the top, not the very, very top, but that second row right there. Probably this one's best. And then we'll go all the way down to the bottom and out through that first bugle bead on the left, just picking up where we left off from the fringe. Ideally, I would have had enough thread to work that first bugle and then work up the bias edge to weave in that end. So breaking up the fringe in this particular pair of earrings from one side to another is ideal, but sometimes you're off by like 2 inches. And that can ruin everything. That can ruin your day, but we're not gonna let it ruin our day because I have worked all of the thread inside of the woven piece to leave us plenty of room for weaving in our ends without any frustration or, what's the word I'm thinking of? Obstacles. Yes. Okay, so here we go. We're only going to work a single strand of beads coming out of this bottom bugle. And then we're going to work back up the strand and back up into the bottom bugle like we would work any normal pair of seed bead earrings where we're working each single strand into the foundation column, if that makes sense. If you watched my previous videos, you'd kind of know what I'm talking about, but there's no need to double your strands here at the bottom 2 bugles, because now we're no longer at the bias technically, and it can get bulky right there. I don't think it would be a problem, but you know, if you wanted to double your strands per bugle at the bottom and have 4, that's fine. I found that 2 is just fine. Or if you want to work a third, so you have like 3 strands, you could do that too. But this is really easy, it's quicker, and it works just fine. So now we're going to work up that second strand of seed beads into the second bugle from the bottom. And we'll be working the rest of our way up the other side along the bias. So in the next little bugle that we're coming out of right now, this little spot, we're going to continue up with our double strands. So here you see my 2 strands of beads, my 2 strands of beads, and now we're going to work up into the next bugle, just like that. And here I want to show you just a little how everything kind of looks. So you've got the 2 little legs at the bottom, and then the 2 little arms on each side, and then it's just going to go up. Kind of looks like a weird alien thing when it's all sprawled out, but once it's dangling, it looks kind of nice. I really like it, but you know, I might be a little biased. And I've mentioned before in other videos, as you're working the fringe, just be mindful to twist and turn and fuss over your fringe a little bit. It may seem tedious and it may seem like it's a minor detail, but every little attention to detail that you can employ, I really, really, really highly suggest it, because you will be much happier with your fringe once you've completed everything. I think it's worth it. So here, I know I mentioned I don't like a lot of visible thread on the top edge of the woven piece, but now that we're pretty much totally done with everything, what exposed thread that you can have up there on the top edge, you can be more in control of. And since this thread is black and the woven pieces are black, it'll blend very, very nicely. But you can run into issues when you're working with different colors and they're highly visible. So I just work all the way up the top, and then I come back down all the way along the edge. So I work into each bugle along the bias, and I have plenty of room because I didn't work too much of the fringe thread into those bugle beads as I was working up and down the bias edge. So that allotted me plenty of room to make 2 passes as I'm weaving through. So we've got that first pass, and then I'm going to come back up and then weave in my ends, which you have also seen. But if you haven't seen me weave in the ends for bugles, you can check the bugle diamond as well. But I tend to leave some portion of weaving in ends in all of my videos throughout the process so that you can see. It's good to have a reminder, because it's very tempting to not weave in those ends because you're just done, especially when you're at this point. You're just like, oh, I want to get over with. I want to wear it. I want to put the ear wire on, because it's a very gratifying moment, but you don't want your earrings coming apart later on. Just a couple more minutes of meticulous attention to detail will make all the difference. And like I mentioned before in this video earlier on, if you'd like to entertain yourself with podcasts or music or other YouTube channels like Storytime with Mr. Ballin, it'll make this process a lot more tolerable. In fact, you'll probably want to prolong the weaving in of the ends because his stories are great and he's got quite a few uploaded already. Now we've come to my absolute favorite part, the part where we're finished and we can grab our ear wires and attach them. So I like sterling silver, I like gold filled, I like surgical steel, whatever you like, use it. And you get your pliers and you twist them open. I don't even need to do this anymore in my videos. I just enjoy it so much. And see the thread, you can see a little bit of the thread exposed, but it's really negligible. But the side where I didn't weave in all the ends, I like to put that one in the front. So the front goes with the little curvy side, like that. And I feel like I should have put brighter seed beads for the loop, but I think this will do. Oh, there we go. Now you just repeat the process all over again. Nah, it's fun though. I hope this helped and I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for joining me.